What's stuck in the water? Pull it up. It's heavy. Call more people. Why is this box so heavy? Try opening it. Oh man, there's a body in the barrel. Those were the words full of panic and fear of the people in the Hyogo Prefectural Police when they found a concrete barrel from the bottom of Hainase Port with the body of Mr. Jiro Hashimoto inside. However, upon further investigation, the police discovered that the serial murder case lasting nearly 15 years and involving more than 7 families was exposed for the first time. And that was one of the many victims of Japan's most shocking and horrifying serial murder case, the Piranha family case. I'm Shannon 8X. Welcome to Cold Case Killers. It all started with Miyoko Sumida, a woman born in 1948. Miyoko Sumida dropped out of high school, and in her teens, she opened a bar that hired women to work in the red light district of Amagasaki. Miyoko Sumida married her first husband at the age of 23, but the marriage only lasted 2 years. No one knows how Miyoko Sumida suddenly became rich, even though her business was not doing well at all. Miyoko Sumida was also very boastful. She once allowed her neighbors to admire a diamond item worth up to 1.3 million USD. Miyoko Sumida was a rare case at that time because the elderly in Japan now face countless difficulties, and society has presented many harsh challenges to them. At the same time, the aging population in Japan is happening too quickly, causing society to shoulder more and more costs. That's why the elderly in Japan are often assaulted and abused by family members because of their fatigue and frustration. It seemed that Miyoko Sumida was someone who did not like this at all. So she began to think of a way to escape this closed cycle of suffering. For Miyoko Sumida, having power and money was the key to escaping the social cycle. She wanted to be at the top of the food chain. And of course, there was no better place to prove her twisted point of view than within her own family. So Miyoko Sumida began to influence her son, Yutaro Sumida. She told Yutaro about the insurance money his father had and how comfortable his life would be if he inherited it. Gradually, Miyoko Sumida aroused greed within Yutaro. As a result, during a sightseeing trip to Cape Manza in Okinawa in 2005, Miyoko Sumida's 51-year-old husband, Hisayoshi Sumida, died in an accident. Not long after, a payment of nearly $600,000 for insurance policies and a mortgage waiver was made to Miyoko Sumida. But it was not until later that people discovered that Yutaro himself was involved in his father's death. Miyoko Sumida realized that making money and the satisfying feeling of being obeyed by others had never been easier. Starting from here, Miyoko Sumida officially applied this trick to target her other prey. Her general formula was to look for a family as prey, then find a way to infiltrate this new family. Next, she would seduce, induce, psychologically manipulate, and brainwash easily influence people, and could even torture, mistreat, imprison, and starve them, causing family members to kill each other. But the most terrible thing is that Miyoko Sumida never took action directly. She was like a devil who whispered in the ears of her victims day and night, then slowly turned them into zombies that obeyed her will. They were willing to massacre their loved ones. And then, when they woke up, they still did not dare to resist Miyoko Sumida, because from beginning to end, her hands had never had any blood on them. Yet she was the one who clearly orchestrated every cruel act. After the first plan succeeded, Miyoko Sumida realized she could do this with countless families in Japan and make a large amount of money if her dirty schemes were successful. That's why crimes continued to emerge. The tragic story of the O family began in April 2009. According to Kawamura, he and Miyoko Sumida first met around that time. At the time, Kawamura was employed by a company operating in the metro sector. During the course of their acquaintance, he became fascinated by Miyoko Sumida, forming a peculiar, trusting relationship. This was not an extramarital love affair, but rather a kind of soulmate connection. Kawamura viewed Miyoko Sumida as a teacher, sister, and close friend. It's perplexing why Kawamura so readily followed Miyoko Sumida's advice to quit his job at the old company, handing over more than 66,000 USD in severance pay. Not stopping there, he also heeded Miyoko Sumida's advice to divorce Mrs. Oi's eldest daughter. Yet he continued to live with the family. This further underscores the extent of Miyoko Sumida's psychological manipulation. He invited Miyoko Sumida to his home to introduce her to the Oi family, unaware that this would mark the beginning of a dark, horrifying period for his family. It took Miyoko Sumida only a short amount of time to establish a close relationship with the Oi family. Then she began inciting Kawamura, his wife, and Mrs. Oi's youngest daughter to torture Mrs. Oi to death. Miyoko Sumida convinced them that Mrs. Oi had caused psychological harm to her daughter's childhoods. Moreover, she told Kawamura that Mrs. Oi looked down on him for being unable to afford his own house. With her manipulative eloquence, Miyoko Sumida depicted Mrs. Oi as a domineering, tyrannical old woman who enjoyed mistreating others to her daughters and son-in-law. After Mrs. O's death, the four individuals quietly placed her body in an iron barrel and transported it to an abandoned warehouse. Fearing discovery, they also deliberately filled the barrel with cement to mask the odor. They then reported to the police that Mrs. O had gone missing after an afternoon walk. Despite their efforts, the police were unable to locate Mrs. Oe. Did not stop there. On December 10, 2011, the police received a phone call reporting, "Someone found 3 bodies buried in a house." The homeowner, Mr. Hisashi Hashimoto, was among the 3 bodies unearthed at Hashimoto's house, along with his younger brother and mother. But what does Miyoko Sumida have to do with the deaths in this household? It turned out that in 1981, Miyoko Sumida and her younger sister, Masanori Sumida, who was later also identified as an accomplice for unknown reasons, came to stay at the Hashimoto house. At that time, home to Mr. Hashimoto, his mother, and his younger brother. However, it wasn't until later investigations that it was discovered Miyoko Sumida, with her persuasive abilities, had enabled them to integrate into the Hashimoto family by creating a sense of isolation and even arranging for her sister to meet Hisashi Hashimoto, potentially leading to marriage. In 1987, Mr. Hashimoto's mother went missing and was later confirmed to have died that same year. By 2001, Miyoko Sumida's plan had succeeded, and her sister married Hisashi Hashimoto. In 2005, while the couple was traveling, Mr. Hashimoto died after falling from a cliff. This time, it was easier for Miyoko Sumida, as the person who directly caused someone's death was her younger sister. Mr. Hashimoto's death bore similarities to the demise of Miyoko Sumida's late husband. Consequently, Miyoko Sumida's sister inherited all of Mr. Hashimoto's insurance money and assets. Everything was proceeding smoothly for Miyoko Sumida until a man appeared and disrupted her plans. In 2007, Mr. Hashimoto's younger brother ran away from home and disappeared, but he was found in 2009. Fearing that Mr. Hashimoto's younger brother would claim his inheritance, Miyoko Sumida and her sister began plotting to kill him. In 2011, Mr. Hashimoto's younger brother was brutally and coldly murdered by his cruel sister-in-law, Miyoko Sumida's sister. His body was then placed in an oil barrel to decompose and buried under the floor. With the tragic events involving the Oe and Hashimoto families, Miyoko Sumida was far from filled with regret. On the contrary, she became increasingly satisfied and began to seek out more victims. The danger Miyoko Sumida represented grew, and she began to crave the manipulation and torture of others. The next victims were the Yokochi and Kadawaki families, who were related to each other. During a funeral held for the 2 families, Miyoko Sumida attended despite not being invited, leading to a dispute between Miyoko Sumida and the families. This incident caused Miyoko Sumida to harbor a grudge against both families and plan her revenge. Miyoko Sumida began by barging into the Kadawaki home, claiming she had the backing of the Yakuza, the Japanese underworld, and threatened everyone to obey her. Due to the naivety and trustfulness of the Kadawaki family, they fell into Miyoko Sumida's deadly trap. Not stopping there, this menacing woman dragged the Yokochi family into dire straits. The youngest son of the Yokochi family owed a large amount of money. Miyoko Sumida stepped in, claiming she would help them pay off the debt, then tricked them into selling all their land and house to pay the debt, and finally locked them up with the Kadawaki family, continuously subjecting them to mental and physical torture. She often forced them to stand for many hours at a time, made them work without rest, and even devised plans for family members to torture each other, children beating their mothers, and wives becoming stalkers and informants, reporting the actions of family members to her. The brothers turned into enemies. The abuse and torture of family members toward each other and of children beating their mother quickly became a pastime for Miyoko Sumida. Yet those victims are still confused and refuse to awaken from their nightmare. In 1999, the mother of the three Yokochi brothers was tortured to death, and the eldest son, filled with regret, committed suicide alongside his mother. The children of these two families were adopted by Miyoko Sumida. After a period of brainwashing, they failed to recognize their biological parents, even harbored hatred for them, and listened only to Miyoko Sumida. During the time they were detained and tortured by Miyoko Sumida, the Yokochi and Kadawaki families reported the crime many times, but the police consistently refused to intervene, using the excuse of not handling family conflicts. On the day the mother and three Yokochi brothers were tortured to death, neighbors heard painful screams and groans. They immediately reported to the police, but the police only came to observe and then left. When Takeo Kadawaki was forced to steal from a warehouse, he surrendered, but the police refused to accept his claim that he was imprisoned and mistreated. This detail caused a significant controversy and a wave of criticism toward the Japanese police for a long time. No one understands how the police could be so negligent as to ignore these signs of Miyoko Sumida's horrific crimes. Thus, it seems that evil has not been stopped. The Tanimoto family was dragged into this case because Mr. Tanimoto's brother-in-law had borrowed money from a gangster, and Miyoko Sumida helped solve the problem. Consequently, Mr. Tanimoto inadvertently became indebted to Miyoko Sumida. Afterward, Miyoko Sumida suddenly brought many people into the Tanimoto's house. Since the Tanimoto family had received money from Miyoko Sumida, they did not dare to protest. These people took over Mr. Tanimoto's house, detained 4 members of his family on the upper floor, and controlled all their food and drink according to Mrs. Miyoko Sumida's decisions. From being homeowners, they were abruptly turned into slaves in their own house. Mr. Tanimoto's eldest daughter, an employee of an internet company and part of the intellectual class, protested and constantly opposed Miyoko Sumida when she saw her family in trouble. As a result, she was often punished by Miyoko Sumida through beatings, verbal abuse, and even being burnt with cigarette butts and a torch. Mr. Tanimoto's youngest daughter was brainwashed by Miyoko Sumida, who adopted her as a foster mother and helped her in abusing her parents and biological sister. Mr. Tanimoto's eldest daughter attempted to escape, but was always caught. The last time she managed to flee to Osaka and lived incognito. 2 years later, when Mr. Tanimoto's eldest daughter went to change her passport, the police discovered her and informed Mr. Tanimoto's youngest daughter. Eventually, she was arrested and returned to Amagasaki. In 2008, after Mr. Tanimoto's eldest daughter vehemently opposed Miyoko Sumida, she was tragically killed by Mr. Tanimoto's youngest daughter, following Miyoko Sumida's instigation that the eldest daughter had betrayed her trust and could not understand the youngest daughter. The death of Mr. Tanimoto's eldest daughter left Mrs. Tanimoto heartbroken and resentful, leading to her own death in 2011 while fighting back against Miyoko Sumida. During this time, Mrs. Tanimoto sacrificed her life to create an opportunity for him to escape from Miyoko Sumida's evil clutches. Mr. Tanimoto was fortunate to escape, and it was only later when NHK began making a documentary film about the case that he came forward. Finally, in 2012, as the number of victims rose to 28, the police began to take notice and uncovered some unusual activities. One of the key factors leading to the exposure of Miyoko Sumida's crimes was the discovery of bodies buried or hidden under bizarre circumstances. as well as the mysterious disappearances of some victims. Reliable sources frequently highlighted Sumida and her accomplices' suspected involvement in these disappearances and unusual deaths. As the police investigated these cases, they discovered a link between Sumida and the victims. Information from survivors, reports from neighbors or victims' families, and other evidence, such as financial transactions or personal conflicts, also contributed to the discovery and clarification of Sumida's actions. Importantly, the use of modern investigative technologies, including phone data analysis, video surveillance, and forensic science methods, helped the police gather crucial evidence against Sumida and her accomplices. In some cases, signs of remorse or internal conflict beginning to show from Sumida or her accomplices also played a role in exposing their actions. This led to some of them deciding to cooperate with the police and provide information about the crimes. After all the incidents were revealed, the person behind the tragic events was identified as Miyoko Sumida. She is considered the mastermind behind all suspects, including Miyoko Sumida, her sister, Yoritaro Tei, her husband, Masanori Sumida, her sister, Yurato, her son, Rui, her daughter-in-law, Kentaro, her adopted son, and Yasushi Nakashima, Mariko's husband. The most terrifying aspect is that Miyoko never directly attacked any victims. She merely orchestrated events from behind the scenes, manipulating family members to kill each other. After the incident was revealed, the Japanese public dubbed Miyoko Sumida's family the Piranha family. Miyoko always benefited from large insurance payouts. To date, cases related to Miyoko Sumida remain a significant mystery to the Japanese police. Authorities believe this woman led a series of tragic events. List of victims announced: 1987, Miyoko Sumida's mother, missing since 1987. October 2005, Hisayoshi Sumida, 51, her husband, in Okinawa. October 14, 2012, discovery: Mitsue Ando, 71, body found beneath floorboards, Miss Sumida's brother's partner. October 14, 2012, discovery: Mariko Nakashima, 29, body found beneath floorboards, Mrs. Sumida's daughter-in-law's sister. October 14, 2012, discovery: Takashi Tanimoto, 68, body found beneath floorboards, had a brother who was a friend of Mrs. Sumida. October 30th, 2012, Jiro Hashimoto, 54, body found in a barrel, Hanasa Port in Bizen, Okayama Prefecture, brother of Miyoko Sumida's husband. November 2012, Kazuko Oo, 66, body found in a barrel. She did not survive. The case concluded when the other accomplices were punished for their crimes. The public still wonders how Miyoko Sumida was able to psychologically manipulate her victims so effectively. Don't forget, I'm Shannon 8X, and thank you so much for watching till the end of the video.